Years ago, some of these same issues drove my father to sit down with me, to have a conversation, which is no doubt familiar to many of you, about how, as a young black man, I should interact with the police, what to say, and how to conduct myself if I was ever stopped or confronted in a way that I thought was unwarranted. Now, I'm sure my father felt certain at that time that my parents' generation would be the last that had to worry about such things for their children. Trayvon's death last spring caused me to sit down to have a conversation with my own 15-year-old son, like my dad did with me. This was a father-son tradition I hoped would not need to be handed down. But as a father who loves his son and who is more knowing in the ways of the world, I had to do this to protect my boy. I am his father, and it is my responsibility to make him aware of the world that he must still confront.
I am the law and order candidate. There can be no prosperity without law and order.
So there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land, not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land. Just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all. We're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock clean. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination. But we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down. And so they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly.
And by the beginning of the 18th century, it is clear that through law in the Chesapeake, slavery is being made a racially based institution, and people are being considered property.
I am the law and order candidate.
President Andrew Johnson basically gave the white South a free hand in organizing new government. Didn't give blacks any rights and said, okay, Southern whites can form new governments. And these new governments passed these black codes to regulate the freedom of the former slaves. And basically, they tried to put them in a condition as close to slavery as possible, using the law to force blacks to go back to work on the plantations.
I am your voice.
But the reality was that in the years after the Civil War, all of the southern states passed this array of new laws which were specifically designed to intimidate African Americans out of the political process, to inhibit their ability to have economic success, and eventually to force first thousands and then eventually hundreds of thousands of African Americans back into a form of involuntary servitude. And it wasn't called slavery, but it was slavery by another name.
I am the law and order candidate.
In Plessy versus Ferguson, it ruled, the 14th Amendment could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color or a commingling of the races. 21 states would soon pass segregation laws under the protection of Plessy. The turn of the century saw the existence of two Americas, one white and one.
Beginning on January 20th of 2017, safety will be restored.
But the drug war had relatively little to do with drug crime even from the outset. The drug war was launched in response to racial politics, not drug crime. The drug war was part of the Republican Party's grand strategy, often referred to as the Southern strategy.
Public enemy number one is drug abuse.
What will you do when someone offers you drugs?
An effort to appeal to poor and working class white voters.
I am your voice.
Strategy.
You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfire, so you say stuff like
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems. And they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. I am your voice. I am the law and order candidate.
We intend to end the drug menace and to eliminate this dark, evil enemy within.
Put them away where they belong.
3 strikes and you are out.
You're watching poor, uneducated people be fed into a machine like meat to make sausage.
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall.
Now we have people running around insisting that we should close the border with Mexico because if we don't, the wages of working class people will continue to fall. The implication being that the only reason workers are paid like crap in this country is because the border is open. But if you believe that, you would actually have to believe that if that border were closed, that all these owners of capital and industry would just say, oh, well, you figured us out. Here, it's a raise. Do we really believe that the only thing keeping bosses from paying people more is the presence of low-wage, medium, semi-skilled labor from south of this artificial border?
I have a message for all of you.
It is time for an honest look at the problem of order in the United States. Dissent is a necessary ingredient of change. But in a system of government that provides for peaceful change, there is no cause that justifies resort to violence. Let us recognize that the first civil right of every American is to be free from domestic violence. So I pledge to you, we shall have order in the United States.
The reason they do voter ID laws to make sure that people without IDs can't vote, which tend to be poorer, which tend to be more minorities. For example, 25% of African Americans don't have a driver's license or any kind of identification with a photo on it. 16% of Latinos, same thing. Well, you look at that, African Americans and Latinos usually vote Democrat. Cure a non-existent problem when in fact their real goal is not to stop voter fraud, but to make sure as little people as possible vote so they can win the election.